Welcome, everybody, to episode 72 of The Shortlist. I'm your host, Johnny Campbell, CEO and co founder of Social Talent. And you're very welcome to this week's episode, where we're going to be talking about trans inclusion and belonging in the TA space. So, everyone deserves to be their authentic self at work and in life. God forbid I couldn't be my authentic self. But for many trans people, the fear of stigma and discrimination can lead to devastating consequences when it comes to looking for employment, job satisfaction, and just general emotional well being. And despite a growing awareness of the struggles that trans individuals face, many employers are simply still ill equipped to make the changes and be educated on matters that would create a more inclusive and supportive workplace culture. But what can be done? Well, joining us today to discuss this important topic is my good friend Joanne Lockwood. And Joanne is an inclusion and belonging specialist and founder of See Change Happen, a consultancy she'll explain a little bit more about in a second. And looking through the lens of TA, Joanne will share with us tactical advice on creating a more inclusive employee life cycle and also help you, our audience, hopefully better understand the challenges that trans people face in the workplace and how you can best support them. Joe, welcome to the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you. I can't believe we haven't had an episode together in the nearly 2 years that we've been running the shortlist. And it's just wonderful to have you here. Can you perhaps introduce yourself, give us a little bit of background on the business you run and the work you do with organizations and people in this community?
Firstly, Johnny, thank you so much for inviting me on. It's been an absolute pleasure to be invited. And you're right, I don't know how we haven't had this happen before. But yeah, I guess COVID, we've not bumped into each other at the various events. So yeah, so as you said, my name is Joanne Lockwood, and I describe myself as an inclusion and belonging specialist. So I work with organizations. I describe the organizations I work with as people. So that's talent acquisition, L&D, OD, HR, D&I departments, helping create what I've coined as a PPE, a positive people experience, either in their candidates, in the accessible pipelines, creating open and fair opportunity, working with HR to look at policies and processes around diversity inclusion, and of course working with organizational development to look at how we can bring those processes across the entire organization rather than just focusing on HR or candidates. So again, that PPE, that positive people experience, no matter where you come in contact with the people, because it's not just employees, it's not just customers, it's around the whole brand and the whole purpose of an organization.
And Joe, this is probably, it's important to underscore that you work in the general inclusion space and work with organizations on more themes than perhaps just the trans community. But it is an area that we wanted to shine a spotlight on today because I get that most organizations are working hard to be much more inclusive these days. And often they tend to focus on one or two areas. And we've brought this up on other shows. We've talked about perhaps the lack of focus that is put on disabilities and neurodiversity. And there are so many areas of difference that organizations and the people working in those organizations are struggling to get their heads around these days in terms of, you have to try and be aware of so many differences in the organization. I think it's important to highlight the fact that at its core, you work on just being inclusive, which it ignores all those differences because being inclusive, and correct me if I'm wrong, as you see it, is just about accepting all the differences that are in the workforce, in society, and the approaches to being inclusive don't really change much. If you're being inclusive towards someone from their gender, for their race, for their background, for their beliefs, it's just being inclusive. It's a way of thinking and working that transcends these different differences. Would that be fair?
I think at a very high level, I completely get what you're saying there. But I think when we talk about being inclusive, it's about being person centric, understanding what motivates, what challenges an individual. So to say that inclusion is the same for everybody misreads the situation. It's when we talk about providing equity, that's recognizing that different people from different backgrounds, different ethnicities face intersectionality kicks in. We have to recognize we need to be very person centric. So one size does not fit all. So being inclusive per se maybe doesn't fit that one size. So we've got to be really careful here. We don't just put in blanket policies believing we're inclusive without understanding the nuances and the needs of the individual. So yes, fundamentally, it's about treating people fairly, treating people with respect, giving people opportunity, understanding the challenges they face for showing up. When we talk about this, when we talk about privilege, it's around understanding their particular characteristic may have a disadvantage in terms of social acceptance, in terms of social capital, in terms of structural inclusion. So, and without beating up on the straight white guy, top of the tree generally in the Western world in terms of privilege. And the further you are away from being straight, being white, being male, the further or the more challenges you have. And it's not, as I often say to people, it's not about the challenges you've gone through. It's about the challenges you haven't had to go through as a man, as a white person. Me as a white person, I haven't ever faced racism in those terms. So when I show up, I have my own characteristic bite, but I'm never disadvantaged because of the color of my skin. Or my upbringing, I was never disadvantaged at school because of the color of my skin. So it's those are things I haven't had to go through. So it's really important when we're thinking about inclusion is to recognize the challenges of the individual. And that's where I think organizations maybe need to focus a little bit more of is thinking about the different types of people. Yes, fundamentally, we're all human beings, but we know in society privilege does exist. And I think we've also got to recognize that whatever we do in the workplace often mirrors society. So the challenges we have maybe in the UK, in Ireland, in Western Europe are different to the challenges we have maybe in Australia, Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, Southern Africa, whatever it may be. So recognizing there are nuances. And if you're in a global organization, looking at the D&I priorities globally is a challenge, and you often have to look at it territorially. So bring it back to trans, if you like. We look at how the LGBT community, the broader LGBT community, has variable protection under law in countries around the world. I think there's still 70 odd countries where being gay is criminalized, and a good proportion of those countries also criminalize female to female lesbian behavior as well. So we've got to recognize that there are many territories in the world that still have these challenges. And I think a quarter of the world believe that being LGBTQ plus it should be made unlawful. So that's a quarter of the world believe that. And there's a frightening statistics. We're in 2021, and I don't see fundamentally huge steps forward. We look at the previous administration in the United States. We look at how that administration was rolling back LGBTQ plus rights, trans specifically, in more detail. We look at Poland. We look at Hungary. We look at what's going on in Ukraine, in Russia, and other territories around the world, in the Middle East. We're not seeing any advances in LGBTQ plus rights. And when we take out trans out of that, and we look at trans as a separate entity, we're not going forward at all. In fact, in the UK, I would say we're going backwards. We're struggling to hold the rope and hold our ground at the moment. There's a huge upswell of pull against trans rights. And yes, we may argue that is a very small minority of people, but that small minority of people are very well funded, very vocal, very loud, and seem to have the ear of politicians and the mainstream media. And that's really, really hard to push back against. And it's psychologically damaging for trans people and their allies to read this material, read this rhetoric, and these challenges on a day-by-day basis, because it is daily. It's not something you read here and there. It's an onslaught, and there are well-organized organizations. And I've spoken to editors of some of the key broadsheet papers, and they've told me that they will print pro-trans articles if I provide them, because they're being bombarded with anti-trans articles on a daily basis. But the pro-trans articles, it's not news. Yeah, I get up in the morning, make my coffee, do a great day's work, come home at night, watch telly, go to bed. Is not great news. But that's the lived experience of many trans people. But you can always find a negative story, and that's what they're bombarding the mainstream media with, and that's the challenges we face. And this is not niche media. This is the BBC, this is the Times, the Telegraph, the Guardian, the Observer. All of the mainstream papers and organisations in the UK are all carrying similar stories. And that's and I'm just talking about the UK here. So we think about what's going on in Poland, in Hungary, and other territories. I believe in Ireland, it's not so bad. From what I understand, trans inclusion in Ireland, you had your own modification to the Gender Recognition Act, whatever it's called in Ireland, and people can change their gender markers without the complexity we have in the UK. There are some countries, I think Malta and Denmark, and a few others in mainland Europe, also have that rights. But for the majority of trans people around the world, it's a complex procedure. It's been pathologized, medicalized, requires psychiatric intervention. There's waiting lists and queues to be seen by medical people, which again is pushing it back onto trans people and impacting their mental health and psychological safety just to exist in society. And as I said at the beginning, workplace mirrors society. So what we're seeing going on in society will bleed into the workplace. And it may not be that everybody in the organization has an opinion, but they will be aware of this undercurrent of anti-trans rhetoric that's going on.
And I think it's important to point that out, and Joe, thanks for doing so, which is that until you understand someone's lived experience, you probably don't really understand their community, their background, and they don't all, you say to somebody is black, somebody is white, somebody's male, somebody's female, someone's trans, someone's gay, someone's straight. It's not the same for everybody, even within that label, that we are all different. And I'm so glad you came on the show today, because I think a lot of folks out there just don't understand this community enough. They've maybe never talked to somebody from this community. They're reading the press, which, as you say, is overwhelmingly negative, because negative press sells. That's what gets promoted on Facebook. It's unfortunately the world that we seem to live in. And you're right, there are better signs in some countries. It's worrying what's happening in Eastern Europe. I totally agree with you. It's just going so backwards. I thought 10 years ago that we were all making progress on these issues. I really felt that, because maybe from my experience in Ireland, I felt Ireland was making progress, as having grown up as a teenager, where being gay was illegal in Ireland and could get you thrown into jail. It didn't change till I was maybe 16. So whilst it is better now, it's still recent enough where there has been change, has been recent enough. But to see it go backwards is dangerous. You mentioned the news. I want to bring up some news stories to explore a little more, and less on the negative news stories, more on hopefully news stories that can shine light on the community and its struggles and the potential for doing good. So let's jump into our first one here, which is from Total Jobs. And this one is a kind of report on some research that Total Jobs did to follow up on research that they did 5 years prior on the trans community in the workplace. And it was on trans experiences, understanding the community in the workplace. And just as a high level, I want to call out some stuff here and get your thoughts on it to see, is this what you see with the companies you work with? It's saying that half of trans people didn't reveal their gender identity at work, and that was back in the survey in 2016. And that's risen to 65%. So 5 years ago, half of those surveyed, and it was 400 people surveyed in this, so it's a decent number, statistically valid number. That's gone backwards, to your point. So that's now 2/3 not revealing their gender identity. What are your thoughts behind that? Is that what you're seeing out there? Is that what you mean by your fear things are going backwards?
Yes, certainly. I remember the Total Jobs survey back in 2016, because I actually did some work with Total Jobs at the time and helped write an article to sort of bring their stats to life. And I came out, I was open about my identity in mid 2016, and I felt that the world had turned a corner, certainly in the UK, that I felt I was feeling safe. And we wind the clock forward 5 years. And in the UK, I mean, let's talk about the UK, because that's my real field of expertise. The government, the Conservative government at the time, looked at revamping the Gender Recognition Act. The Gender Recognition Act 2004 is a simple piece of legislation that allows a trans person to change their birth certificate. And what they wanted to do was simplify that process. What that generated was a lot of discord in society, in the media, and this is where the birth of some of these anti-trans groups came up from, because they conflated simplifying the gender recognition process with something called self-ID and self-determination, which they falsely identified meant that anybody could just become a woman at any time and then change back and then become a woman again. And it would allow predatory people to use this as an excuse, which we can all see that is a complete smokescreen. But so that came to fruition around 2018. This is when this negativity started, and so we've now seen this negativity grow and grow and grow. And these well-organized groups in society, in the media, as I said, is it no wonder that trans people are now more aware of their identity and their place in the world? They're internalizing their own negativity, their own internalizing transphobia. They're almost believing what they're being told. That they're being triggered by reading articles on Twitter and the mainstream media. Is it no wonder that they mistrust maybe their employer, because they don't know whether their employer is a follower of the anti-trans rhetoric or a positive around trans people. So unless the organizations themselves have a clear external presence that is demonstrating their trans inclusive status, then I'm going to be nervous. I worry about when I walk into a room. One of the other stats, I don't know if you've got it, is that 86% of people said they were positive or neutral on trans inclusion. And I always say, well, what about the remaining 14 or 15%? Because when I walk into a room of 100 people, the chances are 10 or 15 of those people are anti-trans. If I sit on a bus, sit on a train, walk into a new company. So I've always got these stats in my mind. So I'm looking around the room, trying to work out if I'm going to be accepted, if every time I use the toilet, am I going to be challenged? If I make a comment, am I going to be challenged by that? So I don't think it's any wonder that people are more afraid now to be open about their identity. And I think the stats also mirror for LGBT people. We're still seeing people in university being happy to be themselves, talk about their sexuality, living a free life, but putting themselves back in the closet to get their first job until they trust their employer. And then they'll maybe open the door slightly and creep out. So it's not just trans, it's the whole LGBT community is still feeling that they've got to be cautious about their existence. But certainly, looking at the Total Job Survey, the fact we've gone backwards, it doesn't surprise me at all because of this negative rhetoric in the UK and we see in Eastern Europe.
And it's I've been a recruiter where I've been on assignments and asked by the client to uncover someone's sexuality, to confirm a suspicion, which is mental. This maybe in 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the last time I recruited and was asked such a question, but I know what happened then. And thankfully, in the last example ever happened, it was actually not a negative thing. But the person wanted to just prepare the interviewer so that they weren't surprised by what they hired, because they were hired remotely. But it could have gone the other way, and the person didn't have the right to ask it. But people were doing it then. I suspect they're still doing it now. And we're recruiting, this pops up, right? This issue of coming out, revealing yourself in the workplace. We talked about it a few episodes ago on the shortlist, how it has such a negative impact on whether someone really does truly good work. It's holding back potential by having this thing hidden. And if 2/3 of the workforce in the trans community are holding themselves back, that's a whole lot of people. It's millions of people not working at capacity. You mentioned 2016 and that being a seminal year for you, Joe, and your identity. How did it play out for you? What did you face support? Or find yourself being very supported by colleagues, by clients you worked with at the time, or what was your own experience, and what made you decide that was the time to reveal yourself to your customers, to your colleagues?
Well, my coming out, professional coming out was. It wasn't that simple. I ran my own business. I was a third shareholder, co-director. We've been running this IT organization together for 15 odd years. And during the latter part of that, I was aware of my senior colleagues' thoughts on transgender people. We worked in a shared office space, in a unit, with 10, 15, 20 other companies. And somebody in an engineering firm within that building transitioned. They were being open and out, and the owner of that business often used to come into our office just to, like owners do. They share their stories and talk, and they were sharing their challenges with this trans person, and the language pretty quickly turned very negative. They were talking about this person was referred to it, a thing. There's a lot of empathy going to the business owner saying, "Well, it's terrible. You're going to have to put up with that thing working for you, going out and visiting customers, and nothing you can do about it." So I'm sitting around the table listening to my business partners, my colleagues, use this language, and I wasn't. This was probably 2 or 3 years before I was out, and I look back and I'm ashamed of myself for staying silent, for not saying anything, for not going up to this person and offering my support. But at the time, I was so far under, in the closet, I didn't say anything, and it ate away with me. And I heard my colleagues make these remarks other times. One of my female senior colleagues said, "That thing has done something horrible in the toilets," et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, and I was just, the longer I sat around the table at the board meetings and in these planning meetings, working with my colleagues, the less and less respect I have for them. It just ate away from me, and I got to the point where I didn't want to work in my own business. I didn't want to work in that business. I'm not saying I wanted my business to fail, but I wanted my colleagues to fail. And it was really eating away from me. I lost all respect. And when I finally became open about my identity, it wasn't, I wouldn't say I chose to do it. It became this unstoppable force inside me that one day I just had to open the box, and the box blew apart. And it was a really, really, I describe it as a necessity at the time. And I didn't share that at work. I came out on Facebook, and Facebook it has a lot of leakage. So with hindsight, I'm fairly certain my colleagues weren't ignorant of the fact that I posted something on Facebook, even though I deleted it. They never said anything to me. I never said anything to them. And then about 2 or 3 months later, one of my business partners said, "Joe, I'm thinking about where we go with the business in a few years' time, and I've got some ideas, and what I'd really like to do is take it on my own, and I'd like to buy you out." And I thought, okay, that's good. I'm happy. I'm happy to consider that. I was looking to get out anyway. On many occasions, I even thought about just walking away, because I really had no respect for the people I was working for anymore. I just thought, I just got to get out of it. So they offered to buy me out. That was like any business buyout. It's like a bare knuckle fight at times. Lots of blood on the canvas. Taking it to the edge, negotiating. And it finally came out about my gender identity in the last throes of the negotiation, and because they were pushing me to find out what I was going to do next. They were really worried that I was going to set up a competing organization back into IT, and that was their big concern: get rid of me. But they didn't want me competing, so they were really pushing me what I was going to do next. And I said, "Well, I don't know." And they said, "Why don't you just tell us you're trans, and we can just get it out there?" And I thought, yeah. So, right at the death blow, it sort of came out. But by that point, it was too late. I already knew what they thought inside their head. No matter what they said, I challenged them on some of the thoughts that I'd heard them say, and they said, "No, we didn't say that. We didn't mean it." I thought, "Oh, so you're full of BS as well." Okay, fine. So I took the money. It wasn't a fortune. It was like a good redundancy package. But I was, at the time when I was going through this challenge, because I knew what my colleagues thought, my business partners thought. I was concerned about having to come out to all of my customers. And we were a small business. We were doing 1.2 million, something like that. We had wages, VAT, all the things you've got to pay. And we weren't rolling in it. We weren't making huge profits. We were just bumbling along. So the impact of something that major on me as a major fee owner, client liaison, I was worried that I would damage the business. Also, as a manager leader, I had to lead my team, and if it impacted my ability to lead the team, then I was worried about that. I almost thought if I was an employee, I could just push it onto the company to deal with. But because I was kind of owning it, I had to almost like take responsibility for myself, to help myself and to worry about my impact on everybody. So that was what was going through my head at the time. And I didn't have any particular reason to think my customers wouldn't be accepting, but I also appreciated the fact that there was likely to be those conversations, and I didn't want to be exhausted by having to go, yeah, it's true, and oh, by the way, and it's 40 or 50 customers. I just decided it was too exhausting, and so bottling it, taking the money, running, in a way, it worked for me. So yeah, but it was. I'm sure there are many other trans people who've been in similar situations, either as an owner or as an employee, that are faced with the same dilemma. It's just that fear. We all know that everything you ever desire is on the other side of fear. That fear of being rejected, that fear of being discriminated against, that fear of rejection, all of that stuff is piling on your head, and you just want to run away and scream and hide and just let me. So I ran away. I took the money and ran. In a way, with hindsight, best decision I ever made.
But it's understandable from the context. Like the same Total Jobs article points out that 56% of trans people believe it's harder for them to find a job. So again, you're looking at your financial prospects. You're looking at your perceived ability to get a job, and more than half of trans people in the survey saying, they're thinking it's harder to find that job if they're out in public in their workplace environment. So you mentioned earlier, though, Joe, that if you are, interested in attracting trans talent and being open to trans talent, and hopefully taking advantage of other companies' lack of awareness in trying to attract them, you were saying you need to position yourself and demonstrate you are a trans-friendly employer. Tell me about how an organization should go about doing that. I don't want to just point out the obvious stuff. Tell us about what works. What have you seen that works that actually will positively affect application rates in the trans community and give companies a real advantage in a perhaps overlooked community?
All right, let me unpack that Total Jobs thing about the 56% believe it's hard to find a job. So when I first sold my business, I thought, well, let's go back into IT contracting. Let's look for an interim position just to figure out what to do. And I had some very open conversations with agency recruiters, explained about my gender identity, and I said to them, how does that fit? And almost all of them were candid enough to say it would have a severe impact on my employability. This was agency recruiters being very honest, and quite a few of them, some of these are big brands, big names, you'd have heard of them, said that it limited their scope for clients they could put me forward to. So whether that was knowing the client and their bias, or whether it was their own bias they weren't willing to put me forward to because how would it reflect on them? So I had it from the horse's mouth from agency recruiters, and I even did a true event, a true London event, probably back in 2017 or 18, and I was talking about trans inclusion, and people in the room who are, as you know, are in-house agency, different sort of recruiters. So some people in the room actually said, "Yeah, you'd be a tough person to place. You're not the easy candidate." And I've stood on stage, and I have a slide behind me, and it says, "So would you hire me?" And I throw it to the audience and say, "Come on, would you hire me?" And you can see people going, "Oh yeah, we're an inclusive company," but secretly they go, yeah, and that's I know that's what people are thinking. So let's not beat around the bush here. Not everybody, I appreciate there are many companies out there that don't think that way, but there are many hiring managers, many agency recruiters, many organizations who do a double take. So you say, what can organizations do? Well, be honest. Be honest that this is what's happening. Be honest with yourself to say you're not giving gender diverse individuals, gay people, lesbians, queer people, black people, disabled people, you're not giving them genuine opportunity. So you can educate your staff. Yes, you can run lunch and learns. Yes, you can do Trans 101. Yes, you can do all of this. But what you've got to do is recognize the lived experience, the struggles that trans people face. Workplace mirror society, the stuff's going on in society, the pressures that you feel. And how can you be genuinely inclusive? Who is championing it? Who is owning this internally? Do you have a staff network, an ERG, that for a Pride network where trans representation is part of that Pride network? Are you proud of your trans people? Are you featuring them? Are you spotlighting them? Are you amplifying them? Are there senior trans people, or are we just talking about trans people on the tills, on the coalface, or are we actually seeing trans people progressing in the organisation? So if you're not, and I hear people trying to hire their way into diversity, but we've got to look at your existing people. And if you employ 100 people, and you say, well, we don't have any trans people here, well, statistically, 6 to 10% identify as LGBT, 1 to 2% identify as trans or gender diverse. So if you're not seeing that level of representation, ask yourself why. Either you've been statistically unlucky to never recruit someone who's LGBT, or people are too frightened to come out. So it's about fixing your internal culture first. So let's not try and hire people if your culture's broken. Don't bring me in for an interview and then make me feel uncomfortable. Don't bring me in for an interview and misgender me on the phone because my voice is deep. Don't give me the double take and go, ooh, you're not quite the Joanne I was expecting. And that look you get. So I want to walk in, I want to feel embraced, I want to feel celebrated. I want people to, I don't want to have to hide my transiness, if you like. I'm quite proud to be out and open. And many trans people are. It's part of who I am. So, when you say, I don't see color, I don't see gender, I don't see all this, what you're doing is you're erasing a part of me by not seeing me. And I know there are plenty of trans people out there that want to submerge their transiness and be seen as a woman or be seen as a man or be seen as non-binary. But recognizing that some people are quite happy to be open. We don't all have the privilege of passing, the privilege of looking like we're not trans. Recognizing that not everybody is male or female. Recognizing that there are non-binary people out there, there are gender fluid people out there. So does your process work? Do the forms? I still see some shocking application forms. The first question is gender, and it's male, female, trans man, trans woman, gender queer. And I think, no, those aren't genders. Those are descriptions. So it's male, female, non-binary. Do you identify the same as which you were assigned at birth? Yes or no? That tells them that I'm a woman and that I don't identify as I was assigned at birth. So therefore, you could deduce from that on trans woman. So you ask the questions in a very polite way, matter of fact. And I've seen some shocking narratives around the question, which effectively they create this trans people as being other. And so look at the documentation, look at your application forms, look at your website, hold a mirror up, ask trans groups, pay a trans consultant to take a look at you and say, would I apply here? Does the healthcare, is the healthcare fair? Does it support same-sex marriage? Does it support adoptions from same-sex couples? Does it support IVF? Does it support gender diversity, surgery, etc., etc.? And surgery is not every trans person's destination, but it is for some, and it's how you respect that. It's important. I've had a hair transplant recently, which technically is surgery. So surgery comes in different ways. Mental health, we need to think about, have you got support? I've worked with companies over the last few weeks and further before, where they've had some of the trans colleagues have been misgendered at work, and it's caused that colleague to feel significantly impacted. So what's the company result? What's the company's response? Is it quick to respond, stamping on it, suspending the person who was the perpetrator? Is it offering counselling? Is it offering support? Or do they just panic at the time and go, what do we do now? Which is the impact of the two companies I dealt with recently. They didn't have the first process. So it's building those relationships up with counselling, coaching, with trans specialisms, looking at your red lines, looking at your acceptable language policies, looking at what is discrimination, what you see as bullying and harassment, making sure that people understand the employee's responsibility for working in our office means that this is what the company believes. This is how we want our employees to behave. So there's no misunderstanding if misgendering has occurred, bullying occurs, joking or banter occurs. We're absolutely dead clear on this. There is a red line there, and you've crossed it. I'm sorry. And that, to us, is gross misconduct. This isn't the place for you. So it requires that level of intolerance to transphobic behaviour. In the same way, we have the same intolerance as racism, etc., etc. So I'm not trying to equivalence transphobia with racism. We've got our own challenges. but we've got to decide what is or isn't acceptable. If it's not acceptable, stamp it out. So all of this is a collection of culture changes. And what we don't want to do is little performative tweaks, a quick lunch and learn, a quick trans 101, and expect everything to be fixed. We need to really look at it, look at the lived experience, involve staff who are trans or gender diverse, involve external consultants and pay them properly to come and look at your processes and test it out, and do an audit if that's what it takes, and implement the recommendations. And I appreciate, yeah.
Sorry, Joe, I was going to say your comment on performative tweaks brings me on to just, if I can squeeze it in, another article we were looking at, which was published in the Wall Street Journal recently, which itself is normally quite a conservative right-wing publication. Let's be honest here. But the article is about why gender pronouns are becoming a big deal at work. And, there is a comment or an opinion in that perhaps some organizations or individuals who have begun using gender pronouns in their email signatures, their Zoom, etc., are just doing that, being performative, just kind of saying, ticking a box and not really going deeper than that. Yet, I know that recently in our organization, we rolled out our good friend Sam Arwadani's training on allyship. And in that, she puts it in a perspective, which I thought was wonderful. And the article repeats it here, that, it isn't about you when you put down your gender pronouns. It's about saying that it's revealing that you're open to that conversation. You're somebody who understands. You're an ally for that community. That when you list your gender pronouns on an email signature, on a Zoom, it's not about you, right? This isn't about me saying he, him. I'm not sitting here thinking somebody needs to go, is Johnny referred as he or him? That's not what it's about. That you do it so you're giving license to others to understand that you're an accepting person. You understand or want to understand that community, and that's what it's about. It's about allyship. What are your thoughts on some of the ideas proposed by the Wall Street Journal article? And we'll share the link in the show notes and online to those listening live to check it out and make their own decisions, because it can be quite controversial. You typically don't get universal acceptance, and the companies in the article, I think all of them have said that they've made it optional. They don't want to enforce this on any employee to do, but they've seen great acceptance and it's building. And LinkedIn, they mentioned, of course, has introduced the ability to add your gender pronouns on LinkedIn profiles. But what are your thoughts around some of these topics? Because you've mentioned it a couple of times already in the last few minutes.
Yeah, completely. First of all, can I just say that your explanation was absolutely top-notch, perfect, and I couldn't have said it better myself. It's not about you. It's about what you're communicating to others. It's the same as a rainbow flag in the cafe window. It says, this cafe is safe. This person is safe. And I actually say to people who come to me and say, should I put my pronouns on my profile? And my response, which often shocks people, is no, you shouldn't. Because if you feel you have to ask that question, you haven't truly understood your part in that responsibility. So being an ally is not performative. Being an ally is understanding what sharing those pronouns means. And as you say, it's about saying that I understand the issues. I understand why it's important to normalize the sharing of pronouns in society. So yeah, full stop. And I completely agree that organizations should not make sharing of pronouns compulsory. It should be an optional thing. I've had conversations with people of privilege, and I won't go any deeper than that, who argue and say it's the world gone crazy. I don't see why I should have to share my pronouns. I don't see why we have to have this new language coming in where it's becoming trendy and kind of snowflake territory. And I said, that's fine. You don't have to get it. I don't expect you to get it. So please don't. And I know that when I look at you and your LinkedIn profile, you haven't done it. I'll be more wary. That's fine. I'll go with my suit of armor on, and I'll be tooled up, ready for the discussion. But when I'm browsing on LinkedIn, when I join a Zoom call and I see people's pronouns there, you and I have both got our pronouns on this on the StreamYard. It says to me that we're here, we're showing up. I don't have to explain myself. I don't have to. I feel I don't have to say, oh, hi, my name is Joanne Lockwood. I use the pronouns she, her, because I've got them here. That it says there. And when I stand up on stage, I've got my slide deck and it says Joanne Lockwood, she, her. So I'm announcing it in other ways. And it does. It creates this safe space. It means that I'm free to be me, and I can tell who else is positive. But And I also know the lengths some companies have had to go to have this pronoun policy approved. We think about huge organizations, marketing, brand, the layers of management, the layers of complication to get something like this approved. So when a company of a global company makes this statement, I know that it wasn't a kind of like, yeah, let's just do it. They put this through legal, and they put this through legal in all continents of the world to make this happen. So that really says to me that this company really does care globally. They may not get it right everywhere, but they've actually done something here. And so I've seen solicitors and law firms, big brands, who now have their staff have it on their email signature. And I think, yeah, you've really done that, because that person wouldn't be allowed to do it without corporate approval. So, yeah, so I think there is a significant amount of respect where large companies do this, because I know what they've been through to get it to happen. So they've really thought about it as an organization. So that's really powerful. I think smaller organizations, maybe we're looking at the SME market, we're looking at organizations that maybe haven't thought about this. It may seem like a lot of work for them, or maybe they're worried about the impact it'll have on their clients. What will people think of me if I share my pronouns? It's all about me. What about me? So it's about just trying to educate and normalize pronoun sharing in society, because not everybody identifies as male or female. There are people who are non-binary. Non-binary people don't all use they, them pronouns. There's lots of neo pronouns, they, and various other neo pronouns. If you haven't come across those, do Google neo pronouns, NEO pronouns. And also, I've seen a lot of people who are non-English first language speakers now putting their first language pronouns in their signature. So people are French, people are German. So again, that signpost to me that they're not native English speakers. So that's also a benefit. We don't all have a typical Anglo-Saxon Western name. So there are many people from different ethnicities. As an English person, I can't tell their gender or even guess their gender from their name. So by sharing pronouns, it also allows non-English first language speakers and non-Anglo-Saxon type names to identify their gender if they so wish. So I think there's a whole load of benefits beyond just the LGBTQ plus community about bringing acceptance and inclusion into the world. I know many female friends who are Joe, and they often get misgendered. And then there's many other names where even I've got some female friends who even have JOE, and they get misgendered all the time, So I think it does help having that conversation, and it goes way beyond just the LGBT community.
I can't believe we're at time, Joe. I could genuinely chat for much longer. I've had an education, and it's been fascinating talking to you. And I think you articulate some of the challenges, some of the fears, and some of the practical ways we can overcome them really, really well. And you've done that today. I thank you for that. Hopefully, that's been an education, an insight to our audience, and helped individuals who want to do something really think about what they can do. Before you go, as I do with all of our guests on the show, I'd love if you could leave us with a piece of advice, your tip for our short list of tips, it being the 70-second tip to add to the short list. What piece of advice would you leave our audience that either you have gathered from your own experience or you have had passed on to you from others that resonates with you?
When I think about trans people, I think don't just focus on the trans individual. A trans person has a family, they have colleagues. And I know from my experience, my wife went through a huge trauma herself, and her workplace didn't see that. So if her workplace had put in trans inclusion policies, she would have been far happier as the wife of a trans person to be out and open, because she was very scared to bring me to the company barbecue, to take me to the Christmas party, for fear of what would happen, whether they misgender me or they stigmatize her. So I think the bit of advice I would give is think beyond the person in front of you and think about the entire 360 around the people, and understand the trauma that very long-term colleagues may have, where they've known me for 30 or 40 years, how they suddenly got to get used to a new me, and they may well need counseling as well. So as I say, the biggest bit of advice is don't just look at the individual trans person, think about the 360. That's what I would say to people.
I love that. It moves it from being 1% to 2%, being multiply that by 4, by 5, by 6. by those who are going to be touched by that, a family member or a friend who might want to ask questions, who might want to just say, I want to work for an organization who supports friends like mine, family members like mine. Even though we don't necessarily have someone who identifies like that open in the workplace, we certainly will have people who are touched by that. So that's a great piece of advice. Joe, thanks so much for coming on the show. Let's have you back next year. Love to continue the conversation. Been wonderfully enlightening. And I really thank you for being candid and open and honest and sharing your story here as well today, Joe. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it, Johnny. Thank you.
Thank you for listening, taking the time here with us today on episode number 72. I'm going to ask you to perhaps give a little bit more time to an event we're running in a couple of weeks that I'm hoping you will find of interest and worth 90 minutes of your time. Our latest Social Talent Live is happening in November. It comes up on November 18th, so it's just shy of 3 weeks away. And it runs on the 18th of November at 4 p.m. UK Irish time, 11 a.m. on the East Coast of the US, 8 a.m. on the West Coast. It's a free event to register for. And we'll be talking about hiring at scale during the Great Resignation. We've mentioned the Great Resignation many times here in the show, but we're going to have a panel of guests, 2 panels and an interview in the middle. We've got Barbara Lee, who is SVP of HR with Nielsen Entertainment Group. We have Kim Pope, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Wilson HCG. Kevin Blair, who's VP of Global Talent Acquisition with Celonis, based out of Germany. And Daniel Monahan, who's VP of Global Talent Acquisition and Mobility with Uber, joining us with our friends and guests, Bev Kay and Jason Lawrence and myself, to basically run those panels and interviews to get different opinions on, why the Great Resignation, what's causing it, why are people leaving in droves their jobs, how can we stem that, and then what do organizations do to recruit the talent you'll need to fill that, and with some case studies and stories being told. So go to socialtalent.com/live. At socialtalent.com/live to register for free now. But before then, come back next week. We have another show. Show 73 will be back with us next Wednesday, our 1st of November. And we're going to be talking about talent strategy for hypergrowth. So keeping with that same theme, another perspective, and this time from Peter Coulson, who is a manager in the global talent acquisition for Spotify. So Peter's in a very high growth organization at the moment. Spotify doing wonderful things all around the world and growing like crazy. And their talent strategy is very much affected by the Great Resignation and just general growth of their product and services out there. And Peter's going to be talking to me a little bit about the talent strategy he looks at in an organization like Spotify that is growing through hypergrowth and hiring through hypergrowth. And you can find out more and register by going to socialtalent.com/the shortlist, or just subscribe if you're listening to the podcast now on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Or if you're joining us live on YouTube or LinkedIn, come back this time next week. We'll be at the same place for you to have a chance to join the live conversation with Peter and myself next Wednesday. So thanks for joining us this week. It's been a pleasure having you join us with your comments. Good or bad, we expect all the comments that come into us on the live part of the show. If you haven't listened to us live, do try and join us next week or in the coming weeks. But if not, check out our podcast. Hopefully it will enlighten you as to how talent is progressing in 21, 22, some of the great ideas that are out there in the market, how leaders are coping with these issues, how advocates like Joanne are coping with these issues, and how you can transform your organization to build better teams for your workplace. We'll talk to you next week.